Hello and welcome to the Apple, iPhone, iOS Voiceover Compatible Games interview series. I'm your host, Aaron Spelker. Now, Apple, iPhone, iOS Voiceover Compatible Games is a group that is focused on all things about accessible gaming. And through our interview series, we interview game developers as well as accessibility influencers about the state of accessibility in gaming. And tonight we have someone who's really involved on the accessibility from a technical standpoint in kind of some new cutting technology related to gaming. So we have Rhys Lloyd. He's from Descriptive Video Works, and he works on audio description and gaming. So Rhys, welcome.
Thank you, Aaron. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for joining. And so Rhys, I always like to start off the interview series to just have you tell the community a little bit about yourself and what brings you to working in audio description and gaming.
Cool. Well, so as you said, my name is Rhys Lloyd. I'm the studio head for Descriptive Video Works. We are a company that's been in business for 19 years. The company is solely focused on audio description, or what we in Canada call described video. That's by the way, a tip-off. I'm in Canada. Mm-hmm. So the company was founded by a woman named Diane Johnson 19 years ago, and she just identified that there was a gap, that there was this service that was sort of percolating called audio description. It was percolating in the UK and in the US in limited fashion, but there wasn't really anything in Canada. And so she built the company and started really building the Canadian audio description community from there. And the company continued to expand and work a lot with clients, not just in Canada, but in the United States and around the world. And we continue to expand over the years, not just within the clients in the sort of standard areas of audio description, which are traditionally is TV and movies, but to work in other areas, live broadcast, live events, and recently in gaming. We also provide services in addition to in English, we provide services in French, Brazilian Portuguese, Spanish, both Latin American Spanish and European Spanish, and Italian and German as well. And we're continuing to sort of build out that service. We work with all sorts of the big sort of tech companies, as well as the big streaming services. And as I mentioned, we're sort of making our way inroads into the gaming world as well.
So I think most people who will be watching this will understand what audio description is, but just in case there is someone who doesn't understand what audio description is, will you just give the people watching a brief description of what is audio description?
Sure. So audio description is an accounting of the visual information on screen for anyone who's either blind or low vision, or someone who's just for other reasons is unable to see what's on screen, whether they're watching TV with the TV in another room and they can hear it, or if they're like me, they do their work with a TV on in the background and they've got their laptop open, they're just not looking up. It can serve a variety of purposes, but it was originated to serve a need for an accessibility need for the blind community. It was actually started by blind people for blind people. And so the mechanics of it is really to take an existing piece of media, like a episode of a TV show, and to insert visual descriptions into that television show in between the dialogue. So to avoid stepping on any of the important information in the actual program, but to actually just, alert you to what is happening visually as best we can, with the constraint of not stepping on any other sort of key sounds or dialogue. And so that's the traditional approach to audio description.
So in your role, let's say you have a movie, I'll just make up the movie, it's Spider-Man. And sure. Spider-Man comes out and says, okay, we've made the movie Spider-Man, but they turn the movie over to you to say, hey, can you create us an audio description track that goes along with that? And then you're having people who are watching that and then, coming up with the script to fit in efficiently in between the dialogue.
Yeah, so we're like literally the very last people to like we often get things right before the release date, after everything, all the final visual effects are in, all the final, dialogue mix and sound effect mix, and the music has been composed. We really work only with like final materials. And so, yeah, they'll turn the material over to us. We have a team of writers who specialize in writing audio description. This is their specialty. I should mention that our company, audio description is the only service we offer. We're not, there's a number of companies out there that do audio description. Some of them do it really well, but it's one of a fleet of services like subtitling or captioning or dubbing. For us, this is the only thing we do. And so we really, everybody in our company approaches it as the most important thing we do, because it's the only thing we do.
Right.
And so, so they hand it over to us. We have one of our writers. We usually try to make sure that the writer assigned to a project is a good match. So if we get a horror movie, we don't assign it to somebody whose passion is kids' books.
Sure.
It's like we try to meet that in the middle. They write it. We also have a sort of a really talented group of narrators who are specifically trained for audio description, because it is a different skill than other voiceover work. And so again, we do a little bit of voice casting to specifically try to nail down the right voice, a voice that matches the show's mood and tempo, but also doesn't sound like somebody in the show itself.
Right.
And we record the track. We also then take it and we mix it. Generally speaking, we take the final mix of a program, and we add the audio description track in, and we mix and make sure the levels are where they need to be, that the ducking happens in a subtle way that's not disruptive. So it's not like you hard lose all of the primary audio channel when the audio description comes in.
Right.
Try to make it as seamless as possible, because our job really isn't to call attention to the audio description. Our job is to provide the audio description as a service to facilitate the accessibility of the program itself. We're not the stars. We're just there to make it work.
Yeah, I mean, I have found it audio description fascinating. So as I told you, I'm newly blind. So I spent most of my life as a sighted person, the last 3 years as a blind person. And the audio description one I have found really, I mean, I have to assume it's an art form to figure out just the right words in a very concise, 3 seconds you have to convey a whole scene, and you got to come up with the words to fit that in there. I mean, that's got to, really take a special skill set. And then the other thing I find is I've rewatched some movies with my family that I saw as a sighted person, and I learned a lot from the audio description, where they pointed out things that were going on in the background that I had no idea that was an important piece to the overall story. I just kind of missed it because I wasn't paying attention. Or we were watching actually the Born Supremacy last night, and there was someone was reading a newspaper article, and the voice description said what was in the newspaper article, which I never really paid attention to. What was actually that Jason Bourne was reading. You know what I mean? So I've learned a lot through the process, and particularly with that, with things that are important. Does the studio give you kind of, hey, don't forget to kind of mention this in act 1 scene 3 because it's going to be kind of important later? Do they give you any kind of bullet points of things that you should make sure to include?
It depends. We love it when they do, but it's not that common. More often than not, it takes repeated watching of the show itself to figure out where you need to, if you sometimes you don't know whether that thing that's happening in the first 5 minutes is relevant until you get to the end.
Right.
So our describers will watch the whole thing, and then they'll go back and go, that thing that happened 5 minutes in is the key to unlocking this. Right. So I need to make sure that I provide that breadcrumb within the description. And so they'll go back and make sure there's an event. Each audio description insert we refer to it as an event. So they put an event there to make sure it's the storyline is clear. There are occasions when we get to work more closely with production, and we get a little bit more of that information. But to be honest with you, the vast majority of work we do is working with the distribution arms of these larger studios, and as such, we don't get as much creative input. It's more about, hey, can you make it on this deadline, and can you make it really good? And we're
along
like,
that, like how much time do they usually give you? You know, you're right at the end. I'm sure they're just chomping to get it out and probably don't give you a long window to really work with.
It depends. It varies so widely. I couldn't pin it down. If it also depends on how much other work we've got going through the studio, whether we can turn something around in a really quick manner. One of the things we pride ourselves in is we are capable of making like ridiculous deadlines. That is something we do generally, and I've worked in post-production most of my adult life, and working to ridiculous deadlines is part of film and TV post. So I would say, it depends on a variety of factors. Too many to sort of like give you a hard and fast quantifiable answer, but not enough time is generally the answer my team will give you.
Right. Now, personally, of all the jobs that are out there, what drew you to work in this space?
So as I mentioned, I've worked in film and TV for a long time, and I used to work in distribution. I had a job where my responsibility was to make sure that the movies actually got to movie theaters. And so in that job, I encountered audio description. I didn't work on it directly, but I worked with the people creating it, and so we made sure it was on the films that were going out, and so that was my first introduction to it. Over the course of, so what drew me into film and TV was it was the idea of like working in a career that created connection between people, like that communicated something to people and created a community. And I always thought, if you could do that as your job, like it doesn't get much better than that. Like you're bridging gaps in between people, or you're telling stories. And I'm not myself a creative person, and so I was able to tap into my love of creativity by sort of facilitating a lot of that.
Mm-hmm.
But over the years working in film post-production, I found myself further and further from the thing that had drawn me into the industry in the first place. And so the opportunity cropped up to join Descriptive Video Works, initially as the general manager. And I couldn't think of anything that would more clearly dial me back into what I loved about it than a job that literally is about facilitating communication and connection to stories. And so like even more so than anything I'd previously done in my work. And so I kind of jumped at the opportunity. It was a really interesting time to join. Like I joined the company just before 5 months before the 5 months before the pandemic. Not 5 minutes. That would have been ridiculously accurate time.
Right, exactly.
No, but about 5 months before the pandemic, I joined the company, and it was also a time where the more and more streaming services were coming online with a pretty substantial described catalog, and continuing to do more originals that had more audio description. And we've seen audio description over the last, say, 3 years really, really accelerate to the point where they're I think as an industry, we're struggling to keep up with the demand, because there just simply weren't enough experienced people in the field. So the hope is that we can, get our feet under us as an industry, not just as a company, and make sure that we provide everybody who's doing the work with enough sort of enough guardrails and enough of a safety net to excel in the job, even as everyone's sort of being forced to learn quite rapidly on the job. And but it's a really fascinating time, because it's sort of an explosion of accessibility, which is great. And also the industry was still very in a very early infancy, and there's so much video content out there between not just film and TV, but I mean, everything that's on the internet that's video content that's, you know, by and large inaccessible at this stage. How do you handle those things? Like, how do you handle live television or live sports from a, you know, what are the means by which we can create this connection and accessible and bridge that accessibility gap? And our company's motto is describe everything. Now, that's not our mission statement isn't to do it all ourselves. We know that there's too much to describe for us to do everything, but the reality is we want to start building the bridge to allow everything to be described, whether it's done by us or by other companies that are doing a good job. We want to make sure that we're opening everybody's minds up to what can be done, because so much of this is limited by our own ignorance, our own lack of imagination, and video games is a perfect example of that. I don't know if this is my natural segue into talking more about gaming,
yeah, sure.
but when I joined the company, and I should mention that our parent company for Descriptive Video Works is a company called Keyword Studios, which is very active in video gaming, in providing sort of service work for video game companies. So virtually every AAA game that comes out has had some component worked on it by Keywords, whether it was quality assurance or localization or marketing or player support or any number of other things. And so they had acquired Descriptive Video Works just before I joined. And so when I joined, one of the first questions they asked me is, do you think audio description could work in gaming? And I was like, I don't know. I've never given it any thought, but let me think about it and let me talk to some people. And, you know, I talked to a lot of people and some were optimistic, some were pessimistic. Some said this is a great idea, but, you know, you're talking 4 years, 5 years, 6 years before it's like a material possibility. And it was a conversation I had with Brandon Cole, a super blind man.
Yeah, Brandon. Yeah.
Where the penny dropped for me because of some things he said, that we were closer than everyone thought. And Brandon has since joined our company as our advisory council. He also works he works with us as a voice talent as well, because I mean, you know, if you know Brandon,
yep,
he's got a great voice, great temperament, like super great guy.
Yep.
And we also have added a couple of other gaming really fantastic gaming minds to our advisory council in Ross Minor and Dr. Amy Kavanaugh. So we really, it was an area that we were really interested in bridging. And so I sort of built a little matrix of like, how do you get audio description into gaming? Well, the most obvious entry point is trailers, it's linear media, and that's everything we do is linear media at this stage. And so it's just a matter of like trying to convince somebody that it would be worth their while to do audio description for trailers. And fortunately, we found a few clients that were interested, and we can talk about that in a bit. The second entry point is live, which was the idea of like, we were already doing live audio description services for things like the Olympics or other events like awards shows or election night coverage or whatever it might be. And so the concept that I floated was, you know, what about live audio description for eSports or for large launch events and stuff like that. And of course, this this was like a month before the world of live things sort of took a break because of the pandemic. And so we haven't really, we've done some live audio description for the gaming awards. We did Summer Game Fest a couple of years ago. But other than that, there hasn't been a huge push in live yet. I
would think like the Mortal Kombat tournaments might be interesting, or the Sento Showdown, which is a blind participant only fighting tournament. I mean, I think that would be interesting because I think the blind community might want to know what's happening in the
Yeah.
fight.
I still think there's a lot that we could do there. It's a really interesting live audio description is something that is so rare, even in the sort of standard channels of media consumption. Like, there's only a couple of companies that really do it. We're one of them, and it's pretty, it is pretty rare. And so then finding a live audio, so that also suggests that the number of people who know how to do it really well is also pretty limited. And then to make sure that those people were also well enough versed in the gaming world or the game specifically that they were describing. So it's definitely on our radar, and definitely something we're looking to lean into. But it's such a unique area that I think you don't want to, with all of this stuff, Aaron, you don't want to do it badly. And so it was really important to us, and with everything we do, as fast as we need to move in the world of audio description because of the demands from our clients, we also need to make sure we take the appropriate measures to do it right, because there is always a risk as as you throw everything out there and do it as fast as you can, that the quality of it is affected. And we've worked really hard over the 19 years of the company's existence to be proud of the work that we do, and to be regarded as like a premium provider of this service. We don't want to throw that all away just to chase a few dollars in an area that we're not prepared to do well. And so that I think that's coming. And the other two channels of sort of like what is audio description in video gaming are in-game cinematics or cutscenes, slash menu descriptions, or like, if you're choosing your avatar, or your if it's a driving game, your car, like more detailed in descriptions that really, instead of just being literal green armor or whatever it might be, like something a little bit more engaging or descriptive. And then something that involves that sort of that really cuts into the dynamic part of gaming, which is a little bit intangible right now. How do you build something that would provide a fully described game in an environment which is not predictable, right? Your Fortnites of the world, right? So that's a harder one to tackle. But how do you, and that's probably a combination of audio description, machine learning, some text to speech voices. So like that one is still even conceptually a work in progress. I think there's certainly some people we've spoken to have some ideas about how it could work, and they're keen to work with us on the component where we can make the best contribution. None of us are game programmers, and so that's a really collaborative piece. That would be one of those things where we work with the development team for a couple of years trying to figure out that. But that's probably a little bit ephemeral to date. I can't sort of pinpoint when we might see that, but certainly providing description for cutscenes and cinematics was something we thought was achievable. I say today, and I will say that when I first wrote all of this down, it was like March or April of 2020, and so today is a stretched couple of years.
So to bring it even further in game, I'm sure some games are going to open themselves up to maybe it would happen sooner. So, as you said, something that's truly open world, like a Fortnite, maybe that's a little bit more difficult. But if you have something like, like a Last of Us or an Uncharted, where it's kind of open world, but they're kind of setting you down a path that, when you, just like, when you walk us, past a certain point, that's when the enemies will jump out, or the boulder will fall, or whatever might occur. Couldn't you kind of geotag that well, when you hit this certain point and you're facing this direction, an audio track would kind of go off and tell you, oh, you're now entering a village that's overgrown and it's, an Aztec village, with broken stone and, just whatever the description is, kind of when you hit that point to kind of bring it more live and in game.
So the answer is yes, you could do that. I think I think this is all, it's a really interesting area because we run into, we're starting to now, every conversation we have, people grasp what's possible. And so there's less in there's less in everyone's sort of collective biases that falls into, well, that's not possible. We can't really do that. Nobody's ever done it, so it clearly can't be done. And with games, and you mentioned Last of Us Part 2, that was a significant moment, I think, for gaming accessibility, because here you had a game which was appropriately rewarded for being an incredible game and also being incredibly accessible. So it didn't mean you had to make the game, you didn't have to degrade the gaming experience in any way or the narrative in order to achieve accessibility. They could ride side by side and everybody could enjoy that game, which was a significant, I think, moment for the gaming world, because it became like, oh, well, okay, we can't say it can't be done because it clearly can be done. And everybody's also inherently competitive. So that game came out and people were like, okay, I see that they have I'm going to make up the number, 30 accessibility features. Let's do 32. And, so that's a fantastic spot for the accessibility world, because now all of a sudden you have someone having thrown down the gauntlet of what can be achieved. And now, others are rising to that challenge as well. So I do think that what the scenario you described is achievable. It's a little bit more, I think, where we're at. And again, I'm only one person involved in audio description in gaming. I don't know I only know the conversations I have and the work that we've done. And again, as I mentioned to you before we started, can't get into any specifics on titles, but I can say, there's work being done. That there is let's do this first. Let's see what the value add of adding audio description to things like gaming trailers, announcements, and cutscenes and cinematics, not because that's where we should stop, but let's get that nailed down first. Right. And then I think the more dynamic things that's also being worked on. So some of what you've described is akin to work that we are doing, but it's a little bit further off. Partly just, gaming development cycles are what they are, right? This isn't. Right. It's a really new experience for us, where normally we work on something like a week before it comes out. Right. And with gaming, we work on things and it's like, okay,
years.
It could be a long time. And so so that's also part of it. But I think it's that's going to continue to grow, because why stop at what you can do? Why not push until you find out what you can't do?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I would think the accessibility features, and I think it's 60 some odd accessibility features in Last of Us Part 2. If you can couple that with, not only audio described cutscenes, but again, I'm approaching something and it says, I've crossed a threshold and it says, okay, well, in front of you at roughly 10 o'clock is a hospital, and at 2 o'clock is a lake, so that I can get a sense of the space, and it's not like a void that I'm really just stumbling around in. but it
Mhm.
gives me some clues about, what is it I'm looking at, and then add some color to that as audio description does to kind of paint the world for you, would feel a more engrossing and really an experience that is feeling on the same level for a blind or visually impaired person than as a sighted person who might be playing that game. I mentioned to you before we started, with Last of Us Part 2 for me, I had played Last of Us as a sighted person. I played Last of Us Part 2 as a blind person, and I just was having problems connecting with the game. It was kind of,
Mhm.
I'm stumbling around in a void and I'm not connected to this world. And I think audio description has really connected me to a lot of TV shows and movies that I've watched. Adding that on top of those accessibility features for something like a Last of Us Part 2 or a game like that comes out, I think would really open up that game to the blind and visually impaired, and really make that an experience to be on the same level as the sighted people who are playing that game.
Yeah, I think so. And I think one of the interesting things about having like delved into the world of gaming and game engines and that is the level of personalization and control that the consumer has, which is very different from what you can achieve in TV and film, right? So in TV and film, you either with something like audio description, you either turn it on or you turn it off, and that's your one engagement level with it. You can't go, give me more now.
Right.
That's not an
More
option.
detail, please. Yes.
Yeah, at least not yet. Now, I have a working theory. This is revolutionary by any means, that the world of interactive media like gaming and the world of linear media like TV are converging, and that the game engine platforms, which will also end up powering whatever you believe the metaverse is going to be, if you believe it's going to be anything, are going to be built on game engines. The reality is that level of control will make its way into other aspects of life. And so the idea that you could, whether it's watching TV or whether it's playing a game, the idea that we'll use a game analogy for now, because I think it's more tangible for audio description gaming now, and it's not that much projecting into the future. You could enter let's say you have moved through one environment and you've moved into the next stage of the game, and you enter a big chamber and it's dimly lit, and there's lots of environmental pieces that you could hear described if there was an audio description track. And maybe the first time or the first 2 or 3 times you play that level, you want to hear everything. You want to be fully immersed into that environment the way someone who's sighted would, oh, I'm here. Let me get my bearings of what this is before I start trying to battle with the bad guys. And so that is something but then maybe the 4th or 5th or 6th time, you don't want to hear 25 seconds of audio description. Maybe you just okay, I know where I am. I know what I want to do. I'm just going to power right through this. That level of control is available to you with the technology of gaming in a way that's not true. I dream of a day where you can press a button on your remote control and you'll hear more Game of Thrones description than could be fit into the between the dialogues pieces, right? That was a show that was well done with AD. We didn't do that work, but it was really well done, especially when you consider that they're describing this immense world in between people's dialogue.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think the problem with the movies or the TVs that if you ask for more, you're going to start stepping on dialogue or important sounds. As you said, in a game, you could just stand still, and just say, all right, it's going to give me a short description, and I can press O and skip out of that if I don't want to hear it at all, or I can hit X and it'll tell me more, and then I could hit the left bumper and it'll cycle through if I want to kind of skip to the third thing in that the list of things it's going to talk about,
Yeah.
So as you said, you can really kind of customize that. And again, I think that would be so engrossing into creating a world that you're not just stumbling around in the dark trying to, figure it out. It'll, and if you can ask it on demand to every once in a while describe what's in front of you. You know what I mean? I turn this way, now I'm confused which way I'm facing, press that button and it says, oh, you're facing the, the door, the eastern facing door. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That would be, powerful information to make that game more engrossing and playable, to the blind and visually impaired community. I mean, the last 10 years of what we have now been able to engage with has really increased, and we've getting access to more and more games, and I'm really hoping that through this audio description it just opens up even more these AAA experiences that mostly we've been denied of, except for a few rare occasions where like A Last of Us Part 2 or some of the other ones that have come out more recently that have added this stuff. But I think
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was just going to say, I think that audio description can really take it to the next level. It's that next cutting edge thing, I think.
I agree. I think that there's a lot of like phenomenal achievement in accessibility in gaming in a relatively short period of time. If you look at sort of the, relative to other industries making things accessible, gaming is accelerating at a rapid rate and in a commendable way. Now, it's not where it needs to be yet, but it's moving rapidly in that direction. I think audio description wouldn't have been particularly, I think now's the time for something that is supplementary like audio description, which takes the level of enjoyment from a 9 to a 10, hopefully, is the right thing to do. If the enjoyment level is at a 1 and the audio description took it to a 2.5, 3, you're still not really getting much out of the game. And so I think now is the timing is perfect to sort of be looking at this. And I will say, like, I think, we're in proof of concept stage with a number of companies in terms of trying to figure out what that sort of more dynamic version of audio description is. And I think that that's where, you can, if it's done well, and if it's done with sort of partnership and intent, I think it could really make the gaming experience much more immersive. And by the way, I also don't think it's like, I think it's vital for the gaming experience for blind and low vision players, but I don't know that it would be irrelevant to a sighted gamer. As you mentioned about watching movies, there are things you've never noticed about movies until you turned on audio description. And I mean, that's going to be true in gaming too, especially in something that moves as quickly as a game. Now, whether that's something that the player wants or not, I mean, these things are always configurable. You can always not have it. Like, that is always an option if it annoys you. And so, but yeah,
I think they're it's interesting that, like, with The Last of Us Part 2 and their 60 accessibility things that you can turn on and off, and the data gathering that they are finding. I mean, it's, again, I think the number is something like 40% of people throw on closed caption. Now, not 40% of people are deaf who are turning on closed caption, but it's a lifestyle choice to put that on. You were kind of talking about audio description when you were watching TV or movie, but also working on your laptop to just kind of have that in the background. That's a lifestyle. It's not for an accessibility reason for you. So, the accessibility tool set can expand beyond just those who need it to those who find it easier in some way to just experience the game, or more enjoyable to experience the game with those features available to them.
100%. I mean, I would say to people in the sighted community, how many times do you do something without any distraction? Like, how many times do you literally sit in front of the TV and your phone's in the other room and the kids are asleep and you've eaten your dinner? Like, how many times do you literally just, like, that's your only focus? It's not that common. And so is audio description like I will say, like captioning. I mean, I'm one of those consumers. I'm not deaf, and I have captioning on all the time. And I think that audio description, because it's auditory, I think is a conceptual leap for people initially when they first hear it, and it's sort of maybe a bit jarring. Who is this, omniscient voice that is
Right.
telling me what's happening?
All
But
knowing.
I think that for people who stay with it beyond that first sort of instinctive response, a lot of consumers we talk to, sighted consumers we talk to, love it, because it picks up the slack for them if they have to run in and stir their pasta sauce, or or if they look down at their phone and scroll social media, whatever. And so I think that I mean, the key is always going to be that it has to remain good. It's not going to be it's not going to achieve any ubiquity if the service degrades. And so hopefully we can also, as we reach more people, we can also reach more people with like quality description.
Now, when you kind of were originally describing, you got bought out by the parent company, they asked you, what about audio description in gaming? And it sounds like you reached out to gaming companies to kind of, pitch adding audio description. Are you finding that more gaming companies are starting to come to you, knowing that it's out there?
Yeah. Yes. Well, so I think, so I mean, I spoke to a number of different people, whether they were at companies or adjacent to, or companies like game engine companies, just like try to grasp the technology, the underlying technology, and see what, like, try to build my understanding up. But certainly over the last, say, let's call it 6 months to a year, there are more companies seeking to come and talk to me than the other way. Well, I mean, I'm probably still doing more work than they are in terms of outreach, but there are more companies like seeking out to talk to us about it, because and I think it's in concert with a lot of these studios having built out their accessibility teams, and those accessibility teams are certainly stretched. Like they've got a lot to do with probably pretty limited finite resources, but they're, I think, but really, if you want my honest opinion, it's going to take a game being out there and received, and the excitement of a gaming community for that to truly accelerate. There's enough people who know about it now, but there's still a huge amount of people in the gaming world and gaming devs who don't. And I think, again, like I use Last of Us and their success as a perfect example. Like there were a lot of accessibility features that were brand new in that game that got a lot of people's attention as to, oh, like we should incorporate that in what we're doing. How do we get that? And, oh my God, we're at this stage of our development cycle. Are we able to retrofit what we've done to achieve this? And one of the things I will say about audio description, especially for cutscenes, is, honestly, there's nothing to stop someone from incorporating it into a game from 5, 6, 10 years ago, right? You can retrofit that work,
right? Because that's a linear, as you described,
right?
Non-dynamic.
Like you could release it as a. I mean, I don't want to oversimplify it, but you could release it as a patch to your game,
right?
And so and the other thing is there's nothing stopping you from doing it in one language when you first launch, and then chasing that with like all the other languages that they localize games in with audio description at a later date or whatever. So there isn't this I don't know if the sky's the limit, but there's lots of opportunity to work both backwards and forwards. And so we're keen to see what happens when there's a tangible product it's one thing for me to sit in a client meeting and go, think about this. This is something, and another for them to actually be able to reach for a game, put it on and play a game with AD and go, oh, okay, now I get it. Now the pennies dropped for me as to why this could be really good, and why it's also like well worth the dollars they would spend on it to incorporate it in. Because I don't, one of if you ever get one of us who works in audio description to talk about it, one of the things we always like to tell you is it's not that expensive, which is like, there's the barrier to do this is not significant economically, and the payoff is there. The consumer, I always look at the streaming services as a perfect example of this. Those companies, more so than like broadcasters, they know what their consumers are enabling, right? They know who's turning on captions, they know who's turning on audio description. They are able to produce that. And those companies, all of those companies, are choosing to expand their audio description services. That's all you need to know that the economics make sense. They are making more from consumers who enable that service than they are paying in order to create it, and by a significant margin.
Oh, and I mean, particularly with those streaming services, the amount of audio description that has come onto those and have allowed me to go back and watch shows that I hadn't watched before, and have the audio description. I mean, it's drawing me to those services because it's an easy way to engage with that entertainment. I can't sit and, read the newspaper, you know what I mean? Or I have to read books in a different way. I do audiobooks, but it allows me to engage with those,
And I think gaming is in a similar boat. You're going after similar. I mean, you're going after consumers directly. It's not an ad-supported service like broadcast is. So it's it makes sense to provide a pathway for someone to spend their dollars on your game.
Well, and I'll paint a broad brush here, but the blind and visually impaired community is kind of homebodies. We're not, we're home a lot. Accessing that type of technology. You know what I mean? So to have it there and available to us.
100%.
So would you say that is a game like Uncharted or Last of Us, is that the type of game that you think is really ripe for audio description as kind of the next natural step, or is there another game type that you think is a better fit to be that first step into audio description?
I think narrative-based games are a good place to. I think that's a good entry point, because you are following a story, and I think that cinematic experience of playing games like that, the ways in which it is similar to like watching a movie, except you're actually you're the person controlling the person in the movie.
And it has maybe a dozen set pieces that you're really navigating through, so that's easy enough to describe.
And the environments that they put you in those games are quite visual and cinematic, and the game doesn't necessarily I mean, in some cases it does, but doesn't necessarily unfold at such a rapid rate that you couldn't take in description as part of that experience. That's
the one great thing about gaming is just stop. If you just don't move, then you're probably not going to trigger the enemies to come out or something to happen, and you can just let the audio description move or play through as long as you're not moving. So that seems like a very good fit.
And it is like, it's a real, I mean, so yes, I think narrative-based games are probably they're the easiest ones for me to, like, when I'm talking to someone on the client side, they're the easiest ones for me to get them to grasp where that value add could be. It doesn't mean that you couldn't have racing games with audio description, or or silly kids games that might be, like I honestly think, I say silly and I mean that in a positive manner.
Yeah,
I'm not meaning to be
disparaging. Yeah.
pejorative. It's but like I actually think kids games is a ripe area for audio description, as a means to allow that connection for children who are blind or low vision. And we know we do a lot of animation and children's programming for linear consumption, and we know there is also like a lot of kids who would love to be able to play some of those games. And so I think those are other areas where and it doesn't, and so honestly, to be honest with you, I think the only things which are I don't even want to say something like Fortnite is unachievable, because I think there are composed pieces within Fortnite that could be audio described that might be a really positive experience to describe. I think of like the sort of events that they do within the Fortnite world would be a perfect example of something that would benefit from audio description. But I think it's really interesting because I'm not sure this is a concrete answer to your question, but I see so much convergence in sort of the intellectual property, right? We actually did the audio description for the recent Halo TV show, and we know that there's a Last of Us TV. Oh, thanks. We actually worked within our entire sort of group of people who work with us. The person who knew the most about Halo was Ross Miner, who's a blind gamer who works on our advisory council. And so Ross worked as a consultant on that show, helping our describer, who also did know the game and play the game, like make some determinations as to like what to include, what's most important, like how do you paint the picture of this world. But we also, you see, HBO's coming out with Last of Us as a TV property, and so this sort of convergence of things is also really interesting. And obviously you get to see the other way around. Star Wars turns into lots of Star Wars games and all of that. So there's the sort of intellectual property convergence, but also I think there's a platform convergence that's likely to happen that will sort of lead to all sorts of unknown advancements in something like audio description. And I was speaking to our advisory council recently, and I was like, whenever you talk about innovation in audio description, most everybody who talks about it talks about text to speech or synthetic voice, and it's a worthy subject for debate, but there isn't too much new to add to that debate at this stage, because you either hate it or you tolerate it. Not very many people love it, and that's kind of the end of the discussion. And yet what's really interesting to me is how technological evolution that is not directly in the AD world will impact how AD as a service evolves. And that's an area that I think is rich to mine. And whether it's binaural audio or all of the different things, and games are a perfect playground for some of that, right?
You kind of mentioned before that when you're doing pitches, it's not cost that really might be keeping people from putting in audio description. So what is the roadblock? Is it just awareness? Is it just how does this benefit my game? So why should I bother doing it? What is the roadblock from people being jumping on board and saying, oh, of course we'll add this to the next Last of Us that's coming out, or the next Halo that's coming out, or whatever?
I think awareness is the biggest obstacle that audio description faces in all aspects. I think captions are ubiquitously known that the reason captions caught on, or at least the story everyone tells about the reasons captions caught on with the general public is sports bars and gyms. Basically, if you're exercising in a gym, or you were at a sports bar and there were like dozens of TVs around. The captions were on so that you could know what your TV or the TV you were watching was saying. And people were like, hey, this is handy. I'm going to turn this on at home. And that's how it happened. AD hasn't had that moment yet. And as I mentioned, I think there's an initial uncertainty of like, what am I listening to? Who is this unplaced voice in this program that knows what's going on and is telling me what I can see? That's for the sighted consumer, right? So I think that there is, and I will say that even in the 3 years I've worked for this company, the number of times I've had to correct people who, when I say I worked in audio description, they go, oh, you mean like for deaf people, the words on screen. And I'm like, no, you're in the ballpark, but not that service. That's not what we do. And those conversations were common when I started.
You're still educated.
Yeah, and so I think, and you know, I try to look at it from a positive lens, which is like, there's a great opportunity to not just educate people as to what the service is, but what the service can be and what it isn't yet. And so to really engage people in that, as opposed to just like, hey, this is a box you should tick because that makes your thing accessible, and then, you know, you won't be sued or something. Like, I don't want to have I mean, those conversations aren't interesting to me. Let's talk about why it's actually an incredibly creative and important service that can really provide, like, not just accessibility, but like a deepening experience. And so, you know, we don't just want to do like a surface level man in black suit walks into room description. We will, if that's all there is to say about it, but you know, really want to like transform the what's possible with the service. And so with gaming companies, really it's that nobody's ever done it. I mean, or I shouldn't say nobody. There are examples of audio description in some games, but from a AAA standpoint, nobody's ever done a AAA game release that's fully audio described. That's just not something that's happened. And again, until it happens, I mean, that was true of TV and movies in the 80s. Now and then in the 90s, a company called WGBH came along and started doing it. And Titanic was one of the first ones that got a lot of attention. And now it's on every single thing you could stream that comes out that's new from all of these big streaming services. And so gaming just needs that moment, that sort of like open door moment, and then it'll scale up relatively slowly and then reach a tipping point to the point where it's like just one of those additional things that's on all games. And people will then hopefully at that point, the race becomes, how do I make mine better than everybody else's, as opposed to how do I make mine cheaper than everybody else's? Because right now the cost isn't the obstacle, but you know, we work in a commoditized world where cost pressure is constant. And so,
you know, in reading some interviews with other developers and around accessibility, it seems like a big epiphany moment or a defining moment for them was getting to see a disabled person, whether it be a blind or you know, some sort of physical disability, actually playing their game and seeing that, oh wait, this person who, until I put that feature in, couldn't play my game, is now sitting there playing and enjoying it. And that was the moment that really, you know, hit them hard of, you know, I got to be doing this in my games. So, you know, hopefully we can get that exposure, you know, out there, you know, maybe prototypes or something with audio description, so they can see what that can really do for a blind player who otherwise couldn't access their game. Now suddenly, you know, can really enjoy that world.
I mean, the number of people who've spoken to me about like Steve Saylor's videos where he speaks so passionately and emotionally about what it means to him as a low vision person to, you know, have better access to games. Those are incredible. That's way more powerful than me going on a Zoom call with a developer and saying, hey, you could do this. This is a really cool thing that we do. Let me explain it to you. That's a tangible moment, and that's so amplifying. So one of the things like we really believe in is like we're just a company doing what we do, and we like to do it really well, and we try as hard as we can to make sure it's done well. But we're also really keen to sort of support and amplify other people and other voices who can create that sort of tangibility to the experience, because we believe that that really drives the adoption. And so I look forward to whatever that game is that becomes that sort of open door moment, to sort of capture people. And I look forward to hopefully, those those videos of people playing it with audio description, or those the reviews coming out of the accessibility features mentioning audio description, as a real positive. I look forward to that as being sort of like that sort of boost that I need to go like, oh, now I can go into a meeting and people will actually go, oh, like what you do is this thing.
Right.
And I heard about that. That was that video that was going around. And that will be really exciting for me after having spent like 3 years of going, hey, everybody, there's this thing and we could really do it. It's possible now. But yeah.
Now, you had kind of mentioned that you kept making reference to an advisory board, which seems like it's made up of several blind people. Tell kind of more about that advisory board, and maybe some other, how are you getting other feedback from blind individuals who, particularly in the gaming space, who are helping you progress this feature and this accessibility technology.
The advisory council is something Descriptive Video Works has had one from its outset. It was fairly ad hoc for many years, like when there was a specific subject that needed some discussion or debate, that sort of bring people together. About a year ago, I decided I wanted something sort of constant, recurring, engaged. It was partly because the way that audio description is spoken out into the world is happening so rapidly that I wanted to make sure that I was tapping into other people's experience, not just my own imagination as to all the areas that audio description could fit in. But it was also, like, to be honest with you, selfish. I really loved all the conversations I was having on an individual basis with blind and low vision people in the community. And so it was for me to learn what things work, what things don't work, what things people would love to see, what they don't want to see anymore. Just the other day, I had a sort of ad hoc conversation with some of our advisors about live sports and like, what do you want to hear? Like, where do we add value as an AD service? And so, yeah, I mean, that's the advisory council was formed out of that. And so we meet quarterly, and then there's sort of ongoing engagement between that. And it's honestly, it's my favorite part of my job. Sorry, and what was the second part of your question, if you can remind me?
Oh, it was just, and beyond that council, that is the advisory council, what other feedback are you having with the blind community? Are you putting out, hey, here's what we just did for Spider-Man, and let me show it to a few blind people, and where do we need to tweak it? Do you have like a quality blind quality assurance team, or what other ways are you getting feedback?
So yes, we work with we do some blind quality assurance. It's not on every program we touch. That's just that's in our that's on our roadmap, but it's not where we're at. I want to be transparent. We're not there yet, but it is on our roadmap. We also work with blind and low vision voice talent. And so that's another way in which we're connecting with the blind and low vision community. And also through social media, we're active on social media, and when people are voicing things, concerns or questions, we're happy to respond to those and engage directly with those.
Well, I really enjoyed our conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of talk to me about, audio description. And I mean, again, we know it from its, TV and movie stage, but this potential for it to be pulled into gaming, it's happening in trailers, it's happening in some of those cutscenes, but to even go further and push it to really in-game experiences is kind of the next step. I mean, I am fascinated and excited about that potential, and I think that'll really draw me back into some games that I haven't played in a while because of that lack of connection. So I'm very excited about this. Is why when I read an article about this and about you and your company, I really wanted to reach out and learn more and share this kind of new cutting edge avenue that we're headed towards, of bringing kind of an older technology into a new medium as something that's really kind of exciting for the blind and visually impaired gaming community.
Yeah, we're really excited about it too. We're very keen to see, as I keep referring to, that door to open and see what people have to say about it. Where we are today isn't where we're going to be, tomorrow, and so on. So I think it's a really exciting position, and there's, I think, a ton of like amazing opportunities ahead of us.
Is there anything, as blind gamers who, maybe are excited like I am about this potential, is there any advice for what we can do to, make this happen faster?
Speak up, be vocal. This is true of audio description consumers, whether it be gaming or for TV and film. Don't just, and the other thing is, don't just accept it being done. Hold people accountable for doing it well. And if anyone says it can't be done, hopefully very soon there'll be an example you can point to that, like, no, it can be done, it can be done well, and why wouldn't you do that? So just like, yeah, be vocal, and don't shy away from holding people accountable for either shirking that or for doing a less than optimal job of the work itself. And again, as I said, that's across the board with audio description. I think we're now at a point, as we talked about with TV and film, where it's pretty ubiquitous, but it's not ubiquitously good. And so your voices can be heard.
Well, again, thank you so much for taking the time, and
My pleasure.
We really look forward. So hopefully we'll get some more updates. If you have a game coming out that has some audio description, you want to promote it, let me know, or reach out to my community. I'm sure we would love to hear about it. And I look forward to all the progress that you're going to make in gaming for us.
Fantastic. Thanks, Aaron. And thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.